Hello, everyone. I want to begin by addressing the parental guidance sign. I hope you all brought your parent. I am going to be discussing some serious things. I will not get into anything like a case study or anything too graphic. But I do want to, as a disclaimer, say that if anyone has experienced recent trauma and they feel they may be triggered by this, you are welcome to leave the room, or at any time you're welcome to leave the room. I'm also going to be talking about art and writing and how to use those things to fight rape culture. So if that makes you uncomfortable, you can also leave the room, but I'd like you to reconsider. Okay. My name is Mirabelle Jones. I am a book artist. I am a sexual assault and domestic violence advocate. I am a anti-street harassment advocate for LA Hollaback. LA Hollaback. And I am bookbinder, bookmaker. I also pickle. I do many things. I'm going to talk to you about how you can use art and writing to fight rape culture, primarily from a standpoint of looking into what you really are passionate about and how to create discourse using your art or using your writing. So I'm going to start with a project I've been doing for the past 3 years. This is called Jarring. Jarring is a set of 3 books, an edition of 50. These are artist books, so they're not what you would typically pick up in a bookstore. These are things that are usually collected in special collections libraries. They have interesting forms. This is a flag book structure. This is the second book. And they are also unusual in terms of their content. In order to gather the content for these books, I had an open call for people to submit their survivor narratives, and then I broke the survivor narratives down into 3 parts. Each part received a book, and so these relate the stories, the true stories of survivors, with the goal of placing them in special collections, and then the money from that goes to rape crisis centers. So everybody wins. I get to make books for years and work in several letterpress laboratories. And the school gets the books, which, campuses are one of the places these are most needed. And then the rape crisis centers get the money, which is also desperately needed. So the first of these books is this book, which is laser cut and letterpressed. It combines 2 very different forms of technology, Gutenberg era technology and laser cutting. It's a little hard to see because it's so white. And it's also blind stamped, so the text, that means that you put no ink onto the letter form, you just kind of roll over it. And that creates a necessity for the person to really look at the book and have a very close communication with the book, which is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in using books as a form. This is the 3rd book in the series. It's created with handmade paper that includes glass. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time glass has ever been used in paper, so I like to think of myself as a trendsetter. This book was actually the hardest of the series because it contains the survivors' reflections. And this could be at any point in their healing process. So for some people, this was a couple days. For some people, this was years. And in the process of doing this project, I talked to survivors who had experienced recent trauma, and I talked to survivors who were in their 70s and had never told anyone. So I felt like it was a very powerful tool to reach out to the survivor community, unite our narratives, realize that we're not alone, and that this discourse should happen. There should not be a 70-year-old who's never told their story, in my humble opinion. So Jarring is now done. I've finished all of the books, but I am looking to place them in university libraries. So if you went to university, and I know a lot of you did, very smart people here, you can go to mirabellejones.com/jarring, and there is a form that you can send to your special collections librarian saying, please buy these books, and then your campus, your alma mater, will get the books, and then also a rape crisis center in your area will get money. So please do that if you are willing to. And I want to take a minute to talk about advocacy and what advocacy means, because book artists, that term is kind of confusing enough, but when you combine it with advocacy, you're like, what am I talking about? So for me, advocacy is the act of acting on behalf of someone else to help them with their path, with their healing process. And this can take lots of forms. I think everyone in this room has probably been an advocate for somebody at some time. Everyone experiences trauma, different forms of trauma, and we need to rely upon each other in order to navigate that trauma. I want to do a quick poll as well. It's not as fun as Ashley's, but we'll start with the fun stuff. So heads down, same thing. Okay, raise your hand if you have had sex. Okay, good job, guys. Raise your hand if you've ever had an experience that was sexual in any nature that you felt uncomfortable by. Okay, so that's about, I would say, 75%. Raise your hand if you either are a survivor of sexual assault or domestic violence, or if you know a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault. That's nearly everybody. So heads up, I think I've proven my point that this is something that affects all of us. And it's something that we need to navigate communally. It's not something that we should have to put on the burden onto the survivor themselves. This is something that we should act together with our skills, because there are so many skills in this room to address. So the poll that I just did does not reflect the statistics. The statistics say 1 in 6 women are survivors of sexual assault. I personally, having worked as an advocate, believe that that number is much higher. It usually doesn't take into account child sexual assault. It usually doesn't take into account trans women. There are a lot of problems with that statistic. Every 107 seconds, somebody is a victim of sexual assault in the United States. Survivors are 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from PTSD, and 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide. That is a big burden to bear, and they shouldn't have to do it alone. So this brings me to my next project, which I'm working on. The jarring books were wonderful in that I created a way to honor these narratives, to place them in a position where they can be accessed by the public for free, and to raise funds for rape crisis centers. But they're not something that someone can keep. It's not something that somebody can have in their house. And I found that a lot of people wanted to help with that project. They wanted to actually have their own copy. And then as I did more research, I realized people want to know more. People want to be empowered by knowledge in order to address this situation. And as an advocate, I have a binder that's about that big of resources. It's huge. That's why I have such big guns. But it's really huge. And part of why we as advocates have those binders is so that when people call us or when we are sent to the hospital, we know what resources to give the survivor. But the survivor is always the person who gets to choose their path. They know what's best for them. But I would really, really love to see a lot more of you being advocates that are educated about this subject. So the next project I'm working on is called Survivor Manual. It is a zine, not a zine in the sense that I have photocopied like photos of dolls or that kind of thing. It's more of a very sophisticated zine, but it's a zine in the sense that it's cheap to produce. You can run it off from your home printer, so you can print it at home. You can make as many of them as you want, and basically it gives you all the information I have privy to as an advocate, nearly all. It's California specific for this edition, but it does include national resources. It's freely distributed, meaning what happens is that somebody will sponsor a zine. So say one of you people is like, I have 50 bucks and I want to do a good thing. You could sponsor 50 zines. That's a lot of people that could be helped. And then also through the website that is not currently up yet, we are working on it, but you can also request a zine for someone else or for, say, your organization. You could say, we would like 20 copies, and then I will wait until a big bag of money falls from the sky, and then I will give you 20 copies of the zine. It's written by advocates and survivors. I work for East LA Women's Center, and we are all working on making this the most comprehensive, up-to-date, easily accessible pamphlet of information that's actually not a pamphlet that exists. It's community supportive and supportive of our community. I want people to be able to address the needs of survivors. If someone comes to you and discloses to you, I want you to feel like you have more to say to them than I am sorry this happened to you. I want you to be able to say, I am sorry that this happened to you, this was not your fault, but here's a big book of resources that can help you, that you have options. It contains important info to empower survivors and allies. It teaches you what your options are as a survivor. What do you do? What are your options once this happens to you? It teaches you resources within California and nationally that are available. So things like counseling services, legal services. How to take a START exam. Does anyone know what a START exam is? Okay, one person. So this is important, right? I'm making a book that actually teaches people things they don't know. A START exam is the examination that you take after you are assaulted because you're a victim of a violent crime, and you should be checked out to make sure that you are okay. Yeah, it's the sexual assault response team, which includes advocates, the police, and the doctor and nurse that take the exam. Also, how to file a police report if you choose to do so, what the pros and cons of doing that are. Advice for healing and self-care, and this is written primarily by survivors, and I've been taking a lot of feedback in about that. Just off the record, if anyone wants to send me a totally anonymous email or a totally, like, I will never release your name, with suggestions for this book, I really want to hear from the community about what they want to put in there. Current legislature, this is important because a bunch of really awesome laws just got passed, and I want people to know about them. For example, if you're a victim of child sexual assault, you now have 10 years to report. Before, you had 3. It is a big change. Also, you don't have to pay for your exam anymore if you don't file a police report. It used to be that you did. I know, atrocious. Baby steps. Baby steps. To empower survivors and allies, we are getting empowered by sharing this literature with each other, sharing this knowledge with each other. $1 equals 1 zine. That is the current printing cost, which equals 1 or more people empowered to make a difference to a survivor. So if you would like to assist with this project, you can actually sign up on our mailing list. I'm old school, I have a mailing list, at survivormanual.org. You can check out my other work at mirabellejones.com, and you can also submit a project if you're an artist or a writer and you want to make a difference to sexual assault at artagainst.assault.com. The end. I'm sorry if I talked really fast. I had a Red Bull. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Anoop. Yeah. Right. I mean, the two statistics that are really murky are men, because a lot of the time that's not including prison rape, and there have been a lot of studies that have been coming out about that. It also doesn't necessarily include the gay community because they're a minority that tends to not get polled, and they tend to not report. This is all based on reported statistics, and that's a big problem. There needs to be a lot more investigation into that. It's also a huge problem because there are very unique things that affect men, such as women are kind of a little more encouraged to report than men are, so you see a tremendous amount of underreporting. Yeah. But 1 in 32 is the statistic that's given at RAIN, which is totally inaccurate. I'm just going to say, from personal experience, totally inaccurate. I think that we as advocates do a lot in terms of counseling. I always recommend that if somebody feels comfortable going into counseling, it works wonders, because a lot of the time domestic violence and sexual assault counselors have been there, and they know what you're going through, and they're trained, and they will listen. And really, I think a lot of it is just listening, talking to someone who is not going to shame you, who understands the myths versus the realities of rape culture, and who's there with you. And so I would say counseling services are definitely helpful. There are plenty of survivors that find other resources. Like for me, artwork has been a huge resource. A lot of people feel the need to talk or reach out to other survivors, so group therapy can be very helpful. Basically that. I mean, I think also some people get comfort from legislation, like going through. But another thing I want to talk about in Survivor Manual is the difference between criminal versus civil court, because there's a big difference there in terms of the success rate. And personally, I had no idea that you could go through criminal court, get your case thrown out, which a lot of cases do, unfortunately. They have very, very, very bad conviction rate. And then you can go to civil court and sue the crap out of the person, and you probably will win, because the burden of proof is much, much, much lower. Yes? Okay, rape culture. So rape culture, in my humble opinion, is the way that society engineers a culture that is supportive and creates rape as a problem across the board. It's a society that blames the victim. It's a society that creates myths about rape to take the burden onto the shoulders of the victim versus the perpetrator. And we are in it. We are in that culture. But there is hope, because there are some kick-ass journalists, first of all, going on. I love Jezebel. I don't know if you read Jezebel. There are a lot of very, very serious investigative reporters that are feminists that are just kicking ass and do not give a shit about being called a butch-ass feminist. There's a lot of really great art that's being produced as well. I think that part of dismantling rape culture is being able to talk about it freely. And I think that art and writing are specifically important to addressing that, because it's such an intimate experience, but so universal, so widespread. It has so much reach. Mm. Mm-hmm. Listening, definitely listening. So I think, I think part of being a really good ally is just being there for support and not saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. People that do that are bad advocates. You have to trust the person. I know that's hard sometimes. Survivors of sexual assault sometimes will lock themselves in their room for a week at a time, not eat anything. You'll be freaking out. You'll want to be like, here, let me help you. Let me do all the things for you that will make you look better. That is not listening. Listening is allowing them to do whatever they need to do to heal. Just hearing their story when they need to talk, not pushing them if they don't want to talk. Being present and supportive. Also reading this thing that I'm doing. Read that thing. Okay, thank you.